They are restless spirits whose remains were under the little girl's house, because the subdivision where she lived had been built over an old cemetery and the greedy developer had moved the tombstones but left the bodies. And spoilers for the following Scooby-Doo episodes. The gang visits Scooby-Doo's cousin, Scooby-Dum, after having received an urgent telegram from Dum's owners, Ma and Pa Skillet, whose business was close to bankruptcy due to an alligator monster terrorizing the area.
Sure gonna be great to see Ma and Pa Skillet and Scooby-Dum again!
Scooby-Dum?
Before starting out on this trip, did they not tell Scooby they were going to see his cousin?
Scooby-Doo, gonna see Scooby-Doo-Dum!
As a dog owner, I can understand why they waited until the last minute to tell Scooby. It's like how you don't say the word park until you stop the car on the lot outside the gate, because who wants to deal with an excited puppy barking and whining excitedly next to your ear the entire drive there? This is the first time in the franchise where we meet one of Scooby's relatives as opposed to another random uncle of one of the rest of the gang. It's just too bad that Hanna-Barbera didn't stop there. Cousin Scooby-Dum is beloved by a segment of the fandom with a soft spot for his yokel speech and bumbling antics. Continuing Hanna-Barbera's penchant of referencing old black and white movies, Dum's owners, Ma and Pa Skillet, are references to Ma and Pa Kettle, the subject of a series of comedy films from the 1940s and 1950s. Unlike the Three Stooges, the Kettle movies weren't replayed as often on television through the years, so few watching this episode now, and possibly even back in 1976, would have got the reference. I barely remembered them myself.
Welcome to the Skillet Showboat, home of Finoki Fizz and the Funky Fritter.
Hey, what's that on the side of the boat? Do we have another Chekhov's water wheel? The Skillets owned a combined fritter restaurant and soda bottling company, all situated on a river showboat nestled in the Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia, an obvious reference to the real Okefenokee Swamp in that state. Their business was successful enough to rival a much larger soda company, Kooky Cola, who by this point had made an offer to purchase the formula for the Skillets' popular soda, Finoki Fizz. I think we can all guess who the Scooby writers were referencing with the name Kooky Cola. Perhaps it's best for Daphne and Velma to explain the villain's scheme.
Miss Pinkslip fired Miss Dudley from her job as secretary to the president of Kooky Cola.
And she had confidential information that Kooky Cola was about to buy Pa Skillet's secret Finoki Fizz formula.
And by ruining Ma and Pa Skillet, she could foreclose her loan. She'd own Finoki Fizz and sell the secret formula to Kooky Cola for a fortune.
Okay. So Alice Dudley was the ex-secretary for the president of the Kooky Cola Company. Out for revenge after being fired and knowing her former employer was planning on purchasing the formula for Finoki Fizz from the Skillets, she wormed her way into the latter company to presumably halt the sale.
If it weren't for you loaning us money for the last bank payment, Pa and me'd be living out in the swamp by now.
It was the least I could do for people as fine as the Skillets.
Her plan included dressing up as the Gator Ghoul to frighten away the Skillets' other employees so the company would halt production, allowing her to lend Ma and Pa Skillet enough money to temporarily delay foreclosure by the bank. She thought this would eventually lead to her taking control of both the fritter restaurant and soda company. She would then later sell the formula for Finoki Fizz to Kooky Cola at a much higher price than that company originally intended to pay. Is it really revenge when the people you hate are still able to get what they want, even if it means paying a little more? It's not like Kooky Cola had to buy the formula. In fact, it's amazing they would even consider purchasing a competitor's product at all, when usually they just create their own knockoff version of Finoki Fizz and try to eat into the Skillet sales that way. Speaking of dirty tricks, did the Skillets not have Dudley fill out an application or submit a resume before hiring her? Because if her last boss was the president of the company they were doing business with, shouldn't that have raised any number of red flags? My joke earlier aside, Kooky Cola was clearly based on Coca-Cola, and that company was guilty of so much terrible behavior over the years. Planting a spy in a competitor's business would be the least of their corporate crimes. From what we hear, the Skillets borrowed only a single loan payment from Dudley, not the full balance of their mortgage. If the bank foreclosed, they would own the showboat operation, not Dudley. In court, Dudley's claim against the Skillets would be far, far below that of the bank and other creditors. In fact, the Skillets could declare bankruptcy and not have to worry about paying back Dudley's loan either. If her primary motivation had been revenge against the Kooky Cola Company and owning the Showboat restaurant and bottling company was just a bonus, driving the Skillets to bankruptcy was incredibly stupid because it would have actually helped Dudley's ex-employer. If the Skillets defaulted on their mortgage, once the bank successfully foreclosed, they would undoubtedly liquidate the entire operation to recoup their losses. This would not only be the land, showboat, and production equipment, it would also include any intellectual property of the Skillets, including the formula for Finoki Fizz. At the inevitable auction, Kooky Cola would no doubt be able to purchase the soda formula at a greatly reduced price compared to what they would have been forced to pay had the Skillets still maintained ownership. Of course, Dudley could have tried purchasing the Skillets business before the bank foreclosed, but unless she was the secret heiress of a wealthy industrial family, there's no conceivable way a former secretary would have had enough in savings to make such a purchase. If she tried getting a loan, whatever bank she used would absolutely investigate the showboat operation, and because Dudley had ruined it so effectively, it would be unlikely the loan would be approved. If Dudley waited until the auction to try poaching the formula, who would be able to offer a higher bid? An unemployed, low-level white-collar worker who already likely drained her savings by giving money to a now bankrupt elderly couple with no chance to recover a penny? Or a multi-million-dollar soft drink conglomerate with a nearly endless supply of capital? This was a dumb plan, pun halfway intended, with no chance of success, even if Dudley had managed to ruin the Skillets business. She would not only have failed to get her revenge against Kooky Cola or ownership of the showboat operation, but she would have also ruined the lives of Ma and Pa Skillet and put dozens of people out of work for no good reason at all. 1 out of 5 for her design. Dudley disguised herself as a half-man, half-alligator to scare away most of the employees of Ma and Pa Skillet's showboat business. Being in a swamp, this was appropriate and a good choice, especially as Dudley didn't have to do any real work on the costume herself, as it was just a leftover from a movie production that used the swamp location for a film.
What were we afraid of anyway? It's only a costume.
Yeah, costume.
Well, that's another meta moment for the Scooby-Doo franchise.
There's a small motor and battery inside.
This label says, Property of Beauregard Film Productions. That's the company that shot a movie in this swamp last year.
Not a lot of studio prop departments would put the company's label on the outside of a costume where the camera might pick it up. This makes as much sense as those lousy 1970s Halloween costumes that would put the superhero or villain's face or logo on the chest instead of keeping consistent with the character's actual design.
Maybe the gator ghoul is some kind of mechanical monster?
No way.
Fred is awfully insistent that the gator ghoul isn't a mechanical device, considering the gang had run up against puppets and robots before. This does make sense, however, if you agree with my view that every Scooby series belongs in its own self-contained universe, thus making this the first time that the teenagers have come across this kind of monster effect.
The Skillet's telegram said they were having big problems with the ghost of the Gator Ghoul.
Ghost of the Gator Ghoul?
I can understand why they wouldn't, but did the gang really not tell Scooby they were visiting the Skillets in the first place because they were being haunted? For whatever reason, Fred refers to this episode's villain as the ghost of the Gator Ghoul. Why? Why not just Gator Ghoul? This is like when the gang encountered the ghost of the Yeti or the ghost of Bigfoot. They're already monsters. What's the point of making them ghosts too? In fact, wouldn't it be safer to be chased by the ghost of a monster rather than the monster itself? Ghosts are ethereal, so their teeth and claws should just pass right through their victims. As I've said before, ghost seems to be used as a catch-all by the writers for many of the supernatural entities encountered in the Scooby-Dooverse, despite them demonstrably not being ghosts. If it's a ghost, it better be transparent and able to float. That's all I'm saying. This is why I'm calling it just the Gator Ghoul in my analysis.
Oh my gosh! Did you ever see a monster like that?
Give it another 3 decades, guys, and you'll be used to half-man, half-gator monsters. Though it's the first time in this specific series, aquatic monsters have appeared several times before, so Dudley's Gator Ghoul is far from unique. It is, however, very scary, and not just for those in the show itself. Doubtless, plenty of children in the audience had their sleep disturbed later by visions of this monster's glowing eyes and nasty big pointy teeth.
With nasty big pointy teeth.
In fact, alligators are just scary in and of themselves. They're what you get if you combine Jaws with Deliverance. Even Sterling Archer considers them his biggest fear. Special effects were also used by Dudley, with the glowing eyes and reptilian hissing really selling the verisimilitude of the monster. Even if they were designed by a Hollywood Film Productions creature effects division and not the episode's villain, there's no rule that says a Scooby bad guy must be the one to engineer their own costume. Dudley gets a perfect 5 out of 5 for the costume. The appropriate choice of using the Gator Ghoul in the swamp location, not to mention taking advantage of existing props and special effects, as well as the overall frightening nature of the beast, more than outweighs the fact that water monsters have been used before in the franchise. Alice Dudley is easily one of the most evil Scooby villains we've ever seen.
Ma and Pa Skillet have been like a mother and father to me.
Ma and me always did hanker for a daughter of our own. Why would sweet, kindly Miss Dudley want to go a-haunting us?
Simone and Lena may have killed hundreds of innocent people, and Professor Pericles may have murdered one of Velma's best friends, but even they didn't break the hearts of 2 sweet elderly people.
Looks like we got a real mystery on our hands this time.
You already knew you had a mystery, Fred. The whole point of your being in the swamp in the first place was a telegram you received from the Skillets asking for your help against the Gator Ghoul. The Skillets were indeed in dire straits upon the gang's arrival. Their fritter restaurant was closed, and production of their Finoki Fizz soda had been halted. All their employees had left except a grouchy handyman and a single office worker who was secretly the villain. Dudley's plan was already mostly complete by this point, even though, as mentioned, it had no chance of netting her what she wanted. But even a flawed design can still have a reasonably successful operation. Hell, she was also lucky enough to have a potential scapegoat around the place in the form of the Skillet's surly maintenance man Simon Stingy, whose hostile behavior was suspicious enough that the gang spent some time trying to determine if he was a suspect in the supernatural shenanigans.
There's Simon Stingy's cabin. Why don't we check it out? Looks like no one's home.
Good idea.
Sure, just let yourself into a man's house. What's a little breaking and entering? Although the door to his cabin seems to be open already. So, just entering?
There's something strange. Why would Stingy have this magazine called Legend of the Swamp? I don't know, and I don't want to find out.
Why would he have that magazine? I don't know. He lives in a swamp. Maybe he's curious about his neighborhood. I live in the Midwest. Would it be that suspicious if I had a magazine about corn, soybeans, or crystal meth on my kitchen table? Also, the gang were visiting a shack of a pudgy, middle-aged single man. They're lucky that magazine is the only one they found in his house. Dudley was able to infiltrate the Skillet's operation and shut it down. She was also able to financially and emotionally indebt Ma and Pa Skillet to her, as well as provide a suitable patsy to deflect suspicion. Those are her victories. Her losses, however, are significant. For starters, why did Dudley even allow the telegram to be sent that summoned the Scooby Gang? Telegrams weren't letters you mailed at the post office. They required a personal visit to the local Western Union to fill out a form and pay the expense for sending it. It stands to reason that the Skillets would have instructed their office employee to handle this cumbersome task. All Dovely had to do was lie about sending the telegram, and when the gang failed to arrive, the Skillets would likely assume either the message wasn't received or it was received and ignored. Dovely could have gone even further by sending or faking a telegram to the Skillets purportedly from the gang saying they couldn't make it. If Dovely was trying to convince people the swamp was the home of a real alligator monster, why would she leave pieces of the costume scattered throughout the showboat and swamp locations?
They shot most of that picture around that old shack in the swamp. Let's check it out.
Hey, there it is.
Let's go inside.
Another shack in the swamp, another breaking and entering. Or again, at least, entering. Ridiculously similar to how Sparks and Rivets used the old crab house to store incriminating documents in their scheme, Dovely does the same thing here by hiding evidence that could be used against her in the shack used by the film production company that provided the Gator Ghoul outfit. First, the Gator costume by the front door was a dead giveaway that the Gator Ghoul was not only not a real monster, but also whoever was using the shack was likely the mastermind behind the plot against the Skillets.
It's on Cookie-Cola stationery.
Second, Scooby discovered an internal business memo with Dovely's initials on it that she had stashed on a shelf, thus indirectly linking her to Cookie-Cola.
Someone tore some pink paper into tiny shreds.
Yeah, and the only time anyone tears paper into chunks that small is when it's something they want to hide.
Not necessarily.
Notice of nation from Cola.com to ice over.
Jeepers, I think we need an interpreter, like someone who can read Greek.
This version of Velma speaks ancient Aztec. Are you telling me she can't handle a little Greek? Especially when she's likely not completely ignorant of the works of Sappho?
And the final clue was the scraps of torn up paper that read, Notice of termination from Cookie-Cola Company to Alice Dovely.
Finally, the gang discovered the remnants of a termination memo sent to Dovely by her previous employer, Cookie-Cola. It's understandable she might tear the document up in anger, but leaving the pieces lying around on the floor of the shack along with all the other evidence was just sloppy. The shack had a wood-burning stove. Why didn't Dovely simply incinerate the two incriminating documents? The rest of her actions in the episode were the typical ones taken by most Scooby villains, including spying on the gang and chasing them around the crime scene. Ah! Chekhov's water wheel. Before giving Dovely her final operation score, something occurred to me while reading the Cookie-Cola memo. It said, and I quote, to AD, set up director's meeting for final decision on Gator matter. BB, President. The key words there are Gator matter. At the end of the episode, we're told that Dovely had been fired by the president of Cookie-Cola, presumably the BB mentioned in the memo. Prior to this, Dovely had learned about Cookie-Cola's plan to buy the Finoki Fizz formula from the Skillets. After her termination, she started dressing as the Gator Ghoul to scare away Skillet's employees before getting a job with them herself. If this memo was meant to be the key that not only linked Dovely to Cookie-Cola, as well as that company's plans to purchase the secret formula from the Skillets, why did it say Gator matter? The Gator Ghoul was not haunting the Showboat restaurant and bottling plant until after Dovely was terminated from Cookie-Cola. If this memo was meant to establish that the formula was being pursued by the larger company, instead of Gator matter, surely it would have said Finoki Fizz matter, or Secret Formula matter.
Don't call me Shirley.
Is it possible that Dovely herself was just a patsy of the Cookie-Cola company? Could she have been the linchpin in a plot designed by the soda conglomerate's board of directors to bankrupt Ma and Pa Skillet so they could not only get rid of a competitor, but also get their hands on that company's intellectual property. I already explained earlier why her scheme, if successful, could only help the Cookie-Cola Company. Was Dovely an extremely careless Scooby villain who left evidence against herself spread over multiple crime scenes, or was she an expendable asset of the Cookie-Cola Company? Upon the near completion of the company's goal, was there a second secret operative planting the memo, termination notice, and gator costumes everywhere, so if on the off chance of an official investigation by the authorities, the soda company would be protected? The gang's arrival was unfortunate in that they stumbled upon the planted evidence before intended. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if an earlier draft of the script had meant to show the Cookie-Cola Company's president as the villain, but Hanna-Barbera balked at suggesting that an analog for the largest soda manufacturer on the planet might be capable of committing fraud. Union busting and murder are one thing, but intellectual property theft? Surely Coca-Cola would never be guilty of that.
Stop calling me Shirley.
Despite the idea of Dovely having been framed being an extremely plausible scenario, I'll stick to just what we were told by Fred and Velma at the end, which gives our Gator Ghoul gangster an operation score of 3.5 out of 5. The extra half point was for the ice that flowed in Dovely's veins. This leaves the Gator Ghoul with a final due score of 3.2 out of 5.
Entering Hokey Swamp.
Later, Shaggy specifically mentions they're in Georgia, so why bother renaming the Okefenokee Swamp this way? The gang have visited real-life locations before. Were the producers afraid of tarnishing that state's tourist industry by implying visitors would face assault by gator people? Why would they even care? It would be another 30 years before tax credits would make Hollywood give a shit about Georgia.
Uh-oh.
What's wrong? Why'd you stop?
I can't go any further. It's a dead end.
I became so accustomed to production mistakes watching the new Scooby-Doo movies, I was convinced the Mystery Machine was pushing that barrier forward by mistake.
Freddy, are the brakes still on?
Yeah, sure.
Are you sure, Fred? Because with both your legs pointing straight down like that, it's obvious your foot isn't on the brake pedal. That ferry moved the gang across the swamp with no driver or ropes, and the gate automatically opened once it docked. That's rather advanced equipment for a mere swamp ferry.
Hush, Paul. She's a-comin'.
Mr. Drysdale, your appointment with Jed Clampett is in 10 minutes.
Oh,
Even if the gang get rid of the Gator Ghoul, will there be anything left of the factory by the time the Skillets are able to reopen their business?
Hey, what's the flower shower for?
To keep you from sticking to that fritter batter again. Well, at least this part of my plan works. Just like flour-covered pizza doesn't stick to the pan, we won't stick to the fritter batter.
Here they come!
Oh, no!
Why did Fred cover himself with flour? He's not acting as bait like Shaggy, Scooby, and Dumb. In fact, the next time we see him, he's all clean.
Fantastic.
You don't feed chili peppers to canines. Worst dog owners ever.
Why does it always have to be a secret? If you know who the Gator Ghoul is, why all the hush-hush?
In due time, my dear Shaggy, in due time.
She is so smug.
This fritter batter's too much.
Thanks, Freddy. Slipping my feet out of my sneakers was a great idea. Oh, that's good. That's very good. There was enough funky fritter batter left for a few king-size fritters.
Scooby just ate them.
He did.
Kudos to the animators. They did a good job keeping Shaggy's bare feet consistent after he lost his shoes, except for one single time. But was it a good idea for him to be wandering a swamp with nothing to protect his feet? Also, he's barefoot in a factory that makes food. Then again, there are 2 huge dogs there as well, so I suppose it doesn't matter at this point. After running out of gas in a deserted winter resort town, the gang are invited to wait in a closed ski lodge until morning. Unfortunately for them, the local power plant is inoperable, which means no electricity. The lack of light and heat are the least of their worries, however, as they encounter the galvanized ghost responsible for it all. In a move straight out of Judge Doom's playbook, Mr. Dudley, the mayor of the town of Winter Haven, discovered plans for a new freeway to be built nearby. He concocted a plan to purchase the surrounding land dirt cheap before the owners learned of how valuable it would soon be.
Wow, with a steep and windy road like this, it's a wonder anyone comes up here to ski.
I don't mean to brag, but where I live, driving in weather like this isn't that big of a deal to us. We don't like it, but we don't panic. Although for some unknown reason, it's been quite a few years since it's gotten that bad here. And now I'm worried.
Herbie's Hamburger Place, 1 mile ahead in Winter Haven.
Terrific town. We'll be able to gas up there.
That sign was pointing in the opposite direction from where the mystery machine was driving. Doesn't this mean the gang were technically heading away from Winter Haven? Even if it says the same thing on both sides, road signs generally don't tell you what's behind you. Dudley recruited the aid of a local power plant employee, Mr. Voltner, by having the man stage his own death in a workplace accident. Voltner's spirit would then apparently come back as the 10,000-volt ghost, a glowing orange specter surrounded by electrical current. Disguised as the ghost, Voltner would sabotage...
Sabotage? How? When?
...the power plant to cut the town off from electricity.
That's all right.
Cold beggars can't be choosers, Shag.
The Scooby fandom gently ribs our beloved Frank Welker for how he pronounces treasure as treasure.
Treasure?
Is it me, or does it sound like he also pronounces beggars as beggars?
Beggars.
With no light and heat, almost all the residents of Winter Haven left town, with only Mr. Collins, the owner of the power plant, and the sheriff seeming to remain. At some point before the gang arrived, Dudley was able to successfully purchase the land he desired.
This letter, which mentions something running southwesterly through parcels 27 to 45. This records book, which shows that you bought up parcels 25 through 45. Dirt cheap.
Let that sink in for a moment. Unlike all the other times in the Scooby franchise where the villain was trying to scare legitimate property owners away to buy their land cheaply in the future, here it's explicitly stated that Dudley had already purchased the land. He already won. Even though he and his henchman Voltner were caught, at best they'd be charged with what? Fraud for staging Voltner's death? Vandalism for damaging the generators in the power plant? Intimidation for scaring away the townspeople? Reckless endangerment for chasing the gang while dressed in a rubber suit that generated dangerous amounts of electricity? With a good lawyer, and provided they don't have any prior arrests, Dudley and Voltner wouldn't be spending that many years behind bars, if any. Nobody got hurt after all. And once the criminal proceedings were concluded and they paid whatever penalty was assigned, they'd be able to enjoy the profits from the sale of their land to the government. Of course, I'm no lawyer, and it's difficult to determine exactly what laws would have existed at the time which the two villains would have violated. One could argue that the real estate sales could be rendered null and void due to potential fraud allegations, except those transactions themselves were likely legitimate and contained no actionable cause, regardless of why the landowner sold to Dudley. All this conjecture, however, is about what would occur in a criminal court proceeding. It's very likely the former landowners would sue Dudley in civil court, claiming they were pressured to sell under duress. At that point, it would be up to a judge or possible jury to decide Dudley's financial fate for his crimes, if it even went that far. Lawsuits are expensive and could take years to settle. so Dudley and his victims would likely settle out of court. Dudley and Voltner would probably still be coming out ahead at that point. It pains me to say this considering they were caught so easily at the end, but the 10,000-volt ghost conspirators get a 5 out of 5 for their design. The 10,000-volt ghost is another iconic Scooby-Dooverse villain, not only featured in the title sequence of every Scooby-Doo Show episode, but even appearing in the second live-action film. Voltner's creation exhibits every necessary component needed for a Scooby villain. It's unique, scary, and features special effects that sell the disguise. There are a few things that should be mentioned, though. During the flashback sequence of its first appearance in town, the 10,000-volt ghost's face is drawn like this. Every other appearance in the episode, it was shown thusly. Was the former its original design, and the animators just ran out of time and figured, let's just make the monster's face flat with a yellow mouth and long eyebrows? Speaking of the mouth and eyebrows, why was there a mouth and eyebrows? At the end of the episode, the head covering of Voltner's rubber suit is shown to be a simple, blank rubber mask with eye holes. Nothing on it indicates when powered how any facial features of the 10,000-volt ghost would manifest. I do have to say, even without being powered, I would totally run away from a guy wearing a rubber suit with wired harnesses like that. Although some people would probably be willing to pay for that experience. The Mr. Greenway in the room, so to speak, is of course the science behind the suit itself. Confession time. I am terrible at science. I can grasp many basic principles like gravity, inertia, velocity, relativity, etc. I have enough of a basic middle school understanding of the forces that make up the universe that even if I can't say why the science is wrong on a certain matter, I would at least have an inkling that something is wrong. This is probably because my last decent science teacher was in 7th grade, and every single one after that was just terrible at their job. Especially you, Mr. Smith. After all the crap you put me through, don't even try friending me on social media. I get lost in the math and the minutia, but something is not right with how Voltner's suit functions, particularly in a wet, snowy setting like Winter Haven. I've been unexpectedly shocked by electricity enough times in my life while fiddling with electronic devices to know that this is dangerous for everyone, including the guy inside the suit. I will leave it to others to explain why Voltner is or isn't safe inside his jerry-rigged rubber wetsuit, or how it's not the volts that would kill you but the amperage, or how he is or isn't grounded by whatever boots he's wearing. Whew. Sticking entirely to what we see on screen, the 10,000-volt ghost gets an outfit score of 4.5 out of 5. Top marks for how original and scary it is, as well as its use of good special effects, but dropping it half a point because even I can tell there is something fundamentally wrong with that suit. The success of Mayor Dudley's scheme is almost entirely dependent upon his town not having electricity. The ghost is secondary and used more as cover for continually breaking the power plant's generators rather than frightening away townsfolk. It's the lack of light, heat, and power for electronic devices that makes Winter Haven unlivable.
I'm Mayor Dudley, kids, and I apologize because we have no power for heat or lights.
So we've noticed. What happened, Mayor Dudley?
It's all because of the 10,000-volt ghost.
If it's below 0 outside and freezing indoors, why are you walking around with the front of your coat open, Mayor Dudley? Who are you? My son?
Wow, sure is creepy in here.
Just once I'd like to meet a ghost in a nice, friendly place.
Come on, we've got to start looking for clues.
While Dudley was introduced carrying a candle, presumably to light his way around the inside of the ski lodge, nobody else brings candles or flashlights with them anywhere else they go in town. So why is the inside of the power plant so brightly lit? The gang arrived in the dead of night, so there is no sunlight to creep through the windows. While there is a full moon and the sky is clear, moon and starlight aren't nearly bright enough to provide that much illumination. While it's common for film and television to depict a dark area with enough light for the audience to see the action on screen while the actors pretend to struggle blindly, if the power plant interior was meant to be dark for the gang, wouldn't the glow from the 10,000-volt ghost be bright enough to make it immediately obvious it's skulking around there in the back? The luminance from my Fitbit is enough to light up my entire bedroom at 3 in the morning. If the producers were concerned about the logistics of animating an episode set at night with every building not having power for lighting, instead of ignoring it completely and just drawing everything as well lit as usual, why not just have the episode take place during the day? There's no reason it had to be at night.
Shh! Look! Zoinks! The 10,000-volt ghost!
I wanted to complain about there being shadows on the wall to spook the gang despite there not being a light source, but I'm going to give this one to the producers. That shadow is Mr. Collins, the power plant owner, doing repairs, and even though they don't show one, he would doubtlessly have had a lantern or other portable light source so he could see what he was working on.
What are you doing here this time of night, sir?
I was trying to repair that generator. Every time I get one fixed, that ghost short-circuits it again.
It's weird that the power plant owner himself is the one doing repairs, right? Even the electric company for my small town employs dozens of workers. I suppose when Mayor Dudley said the ghost scared everyone away, he meant everyone. Although in the flashback that showed the supposed death of Mr. Voltner, he was the only employee shown. There was another option for having power plant problems while at the same time not having to film the entire episode in the dark. The lights could have been constantly going on or off as Mr. Collins struggled with the generators. The gang would have had to deal with continually losing the ability to see, making their investigation a desperate search for clues between blackouts. This would also have added more opportunities for jump scares, with them suddenly finding the ghost in the room as the lights came back on. Cartoon physics and lazy animators, blah blah blah, but come on. Shaggy and Scooby are walking at night in a supposedly dark power plant. The 10,000-volt ghost is easily the brightest thing in that room, let alone the sound of buzzing electricity it constantly generates. It should be immediately noticed by the two of them being that close. It doesn't even create shadows in front of them. It's no secret that simply animating white eyeballs in a completely black room is a lot cheaper than drawing all the characters as usual, so it's almost amazing Hanna-Barbera didn't use this obvious method to save a buck during production. Setting aside the might-have-beens, let's look at what Dudley and Voltner actually did in the episode. The very first scene shows just how dangerous the 10,000-volt ghost is by having it melt a lock off a gate simply by placing its hand over it. At the risk of repeating myself when Speed Buggy did the same thing, wouldn't the heat needed to liquefy that steel lock also damage the metal gate it was attached to? Later, we see the monster melted the gate after all, even though he clearly didn't the first time we saw it. It's questionable why this scene even happened in the first place. Shaggy, Scooby, and Velma discovered a secret tunnel from the town's pet shop to the power plant, and that's how Voltner would covertly enter the place to disable the generators. So why did he go through the front gate like that at the beginning of the episode? If this was meant to establish the reality of the costume by providing evidence as to the electric nature of the ghost, it seems to me that it would have been more mysterious for the generators to be melted with no obvious signs of entry to the power plant, which would establish that the town was dealing with an actual ghost with the ability to pass through walls.
Like we hit the jackpot, Scoob!
Every time Voltner in his monster costume tries to grab any member of the gang should count as attempted murder. After all, he was able to melt a steel lock just by touching it.
We're in luck! I found a battery-powered hot plate!
See what I mean? If this is what happens when the costume touches a frying pan, imagine what it would do to human flesh. Also, shouldn't Shaggy be getting electrocuted right now, holding that metal skillet with what is obviously not an insulated handle?
He dropped us right onto a clue.
They look like sunflower seeds to me.
They taste like sunflower seeds. They are sunflower seeds.
You'd only expect to find them in a bird cage.
Or in a pet shop.
Or in a salad. So I've heard. I'm not exactly a salad eater. It's a bit of a stretch for Daphne and Velma to immediately zero in on the pet shop. Sunflower seeds may not be as popular as popcorn, peanuts, pretzels, and potato chips, but they were clearly established as a snack food long before this episode aired and was a favorite of athletes. Finding a few scattered on the floor like that would be more likely to indicate that an employee of the power plant was a fan of baseball rather than a guy dressed up as a ghost. Also, Shaggy literally ate something they found on the dirty floor in an industrial plant. It's called the 5-second rule, Shaggy, not the 5-year rule. It's no wonder that kid can't keep a girlfriend.
While you're doing that, Daphne and I will have a look around the mysteriously missing Mr. Voltner's house.
I hope you get permission from his next of kin or whoever is handling his estate first. What am I saying? This is the Scooby Gang. Breaking and entering is kind of their thing.
Won't this snowmobile go any faster than this?
Without any gas, what do you expect?
Worst dog owners ever. By this point, the town was almost entirely deserted and there was no electricity for light or heat. Did the pet shop owner abandon all of his animals there to die of cold or starvation?
The seeds we found are identical with the ones we found in the power plant. Thanks, Scooby.
Didn't Scooby just eat all the seeds on the table? Despite how contrived it was, the sunflowers the gang found on the floor of the power plant were a legitimate clue, leading them to uncover more of Dudley and Voltner's plot with the help of a talkative bird.
Like, do you want us to sing or do you want us to send you up the river?
Oh, yeah? I'm a parrot, not a stool pigeon.
Not to beat a dead horse, but this is how a parrot should be drawn in a Scooby-Doo cartoon. Not like this. That's an owl.
Let me see now. Good parrot, right?
Of course I'm a parrot.
Scooby, will you quit that?
One more question.
Yeah, just one more question. What happened to that bird's lower beak? Scooby is doing an impression of Columbo, a famous TV detective from the 1970s who was famous for his dirty trench coat and his propensity to ask suspects just one more thing. The parrot helpfully provides the teenagers with more evidence by way of pointing them to a closet in the pet store that holds both a suspicious rubber suit as well as a concealed door.
There's a secret door in the back of the closet. Rubber suit, tunnel. This door leads to a hidden tunnel. That parrot's batting 1,000 so far.
The back of the closet hid the entry to a secret tunnel.
Secret tunnel!
That led to the power plant. However, look at the size of it. It's taller than the door they entered, and the door they entered was on the main floor of the pet store. When looking at the outside of the building, there's nowhere for the tunnel to have gone. It would have been different if Velma, Shaggy, and Scooby were seen descending a staircase to a lower level, but they're not. This tunnel can't physically exist. It's also bright as hell despite having zero sources of light. Even if the power was on in Winter Haven, or this took place during the day, with no windows, that tunnel would have been too dark to see anything.
Zoinks! So is the ghost! We're locked in!
Both villains wear brown coats in this episode, but as Dudley has fur around the ends of his sleeves, that had to be Voltner. So why is he skulking around not disguised as the ghost? The game is up if anyone sees him still alive. Also, now that the door was closed, it should be pitch black in there.
Oh, I hate dark, scary, spooky tunnels.
Dark? That place is more brightly lit than a dentist office on the sun.
Hello? Hello? Anybody there? No! Hello? Doesn't look like anyone's been here since Voltner disappeared.
Meanwhile, Fred and Daphne were checking out the presumed deceased Mr. Voltner's house. This is where it's established that the episode takes place on the night of a full moon, which might explain some of the light that illuminates so much of the town despite not having working power. But we also see the moon is behind Voltner's house, yet Fred and Daphne cast massive shadows on the floor as they enter from the front.
I found that this place is a mess and so's my hair.
God damn it, Daphne.
Oh, hey Fred, part of a letter was hidden behind this mirror. Look!
This is the second episode in a row that features a clue consisting of a torn note or letter. In the Gator Ghoul episode, it was explicitly shown to be a termination notice. Here, however, there's no explanation given for the paper found by Daphne.
Whereas running southwesterly, parcels 27, 28, 43, 44, and 45.
It reads like a legal description on a real estate document, like a purchase agreement, title work, or property deed. If it was a letter written by or to Dudley or Voltner describing the ground they were interested in buying, it's unlikely it would have included such a cumbersome description and would have used more succinct language like the ground in question or the lots next to the McDonald farm. But if it was an important legal document, why was it torn up and hidden behind a mirror in Voltner's abandoned house? In fact, why would Voltner even have this to begin with? He wasn't the one who purchased the land in question. That was Dudley. Voltner was simply a henchman, not a partner. Is it possible he stole the document from Dudley, leaving one half with his boss, just in case the crooked mayor entertained thoughts of a double cross? This may be one of the few times in a Scooby episode where the incriminating paperwork shouldn't be destroyed by the villain.
Like, what are we looking for?
A record book that will explain that torn letter. This wraps it up, gang.
There's no power in the town, so there should be no lights. Where is this light coming from? Also, how did they get in the courthouse? Okay, we know the answer to that one. Recognizing the significance of the document, the gang go to the courthouse to search the real estate records, where they find what is probably the county recorder's book on title transfers. The 10,000-volt ghost shows up immediately to try and snatch the book, but what good would that do? In my last video, I mentioned how the filing cabinets didn't match Shaggy and Scooby's hiding spot. Now I'm going to point out that those drawers are made of metal, so not only should there be melted spots everywhere the 10,000-volt ghost touched, but Shaggy and Scooby should be cooked alive inside that highly conductive steel furniture. Setting aside the nauseating smell of bosun tang and long pork, that's a public record book, and the county probably keeps a duplicate somewhere. But assuming that's the only copy proving land ownership, what would happen if Voltner got hold of it while wearing his disguise? The book would instantly incinerate, placing the ownership of all lots in Winter Haven into question. If there was no backup copy, it would take a considerable amount of time to recreate the chain of title for every parcel in the area. Houses with a mortgage would probably be fine, as the banks would no doubt have certified copies of the deeds, but anyone who owned their homes free and clear better have a deed or abstract handy, because those who didn't might face years of legal wrangling to prove their claim. This chaos could conceivably delay any plans Dudley had for the land he purchased, so this is another case of potential evidence that should not be destroyed by a Scooby villain.
Now all you have to do is get the ghost to chase you under this catwalk. Then it's up to me, Shaggy, and Scooby to do the rest.
It had to have taken hours for the gang to have piled that much snow inside the power plant. What was the 10,000-volt ghost doing all this time? Also, how weird is it that Daphne and Velma are the bait?
If we can drop this coil of wire over the ghost, the action of his electrical current on the opposing poles will turn him into a powerful electromagnet.
Regardless of whether that's actual working science, kudos to the Scooby writers for a clever way for the gang to trap the bad guy.
What's going on here?
How is the jail so brightly lit inside? The town has no power! Ultimately, Voltner is captured, and Dudley's plan is revealed. Any mistakes by the villains were few and far between, and greatly outnumbered by all the times the animators screwed up by forgetting that it was night, there was no power, and the 10,000-volt ghost costume should be eating through everything it touched. Those aren't the only mistakes made by the animators. Remember how I said Dudley's plan depended on making Winter Haven unlivable by shutting down the electricity to the town so there would be no light and heat?
Yeah, the whole town is blacked out.
And deserted. It's like a ghost town.
Do you see what's on most of the houses in town? And the ski lodge? And the courthouse? Those are chimneys, which means that even without electricity, most of the town would still be able to heat their homes and businesses. There is admittedly one or two wide shots of Winter Haven that don't have any chimneys on the houses, but I chalk that up to the usual Hanna-Barbera animation inconsistencies. Dudley and Voltner get an operation score of 3 out of 5. They were able to keep the power off in town, and for most of the time, kept the gang in the dark. Though not nearly as literally as it should have been. But they were careless when it came to storing the evidence of their crimes, and they never really seemed to take the teenagers seriously enough to attempt to cause them bodily harm. This gives the 10,000-volt ghost a final due score of 4.2 out of 5. It's an iconic Scooby monster, backed up by the numbers. And that's my ranking of the villains from the second set of episodes of the Scooby-Doo Show, shown here along with the ones from my previous video. These scores are keeping my expectations high for the rest of the series. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon below, but please only join if you're comfortable doing so. Patreon members receive credit in my videos for as long as they remain a member, as well as a personal shout-out in the next regular video produced after they join. And who wouldn't want to hear their name spoken in my dulcet tones?